Game two, I played as well as I could play.
Barkley from the outside. Barkley.
Not to brag on myself, I was not going to let us lose.
Charles Barkley with the interception and the field goal.
Charles, a final message to the people of Chicago as you head back west now?
Take that shit off the windows. You don't need it tonight.
Losing to Michael, there's no shame in that. Sports are like a gunfight. And we lost to the fastest gun.
D and Davis Show, continuing profiling The Last Dance, a story about the last season of the Chicago Bulls, or the story of Michael Jordan and the people around him. And also diving into the seasons prior to that, and to help us, because we kind of want to break down parts that haven't really kind of been sussed out to a certain degree. And that's one, the 92-93 finals against the Phoenix Suns and the Chicago Bulls. And to help us do that, we have Bob Young, a contributing writer from the Athletic, Arizona, joining us right now. How you doing, Bob?
Doing great. Thank you.
So listen, my first question for you, coming from the other side, because it's I think one thing that we really want to do is kind of get the narrative from the other side of the people that were playing the Bulls, because the internet wasn't around back then. So you really didn't know what was going on. And coming into that season, you had the Dream Team. And to me, and I'm a Chicago fan, but the star of the Dream Team, as far as who really balled out, was Charles Barkley. And for the most part, we're East Coast basketball fans. So we loved him on the 76ers, but the 76ers weren't that good of a team. They didn't build a roster around him. There was so much just fame and attention put on him going to the Phoenix Suns. How was that transition from Charles Barkley joining the Phoenix Suns? And at that point, with what they already had on that roster, that they envisioned that they were going to make it to the West Coast, to the finals rather, in the first season with him joining the team?
Yeah, I don't know if they envisioned it happening that quickly, but that was definitely the aim. In fact, Cotton Fitzsimmons, who was kind of the player personnel guy at the time, kind of rather famously told Charles when they first brought him in, he took him into the arena and he said, all of these seats are already full. They've already been sold. That was the arena was opening that year.
Yeah.
And
told him to get a banner.
Said, your job is to put a banner up there. And if you don't, then this was a bad deal. This failed. So they never did that, but they did make a run to the finals. So that was the idea all along, yeah.
Now, look, this is the second year for the Bulls making the finals. So this isn't a dynasty just yet. Even though for a lot of people, Michael Jordan may have been the greatest player either of that era or alive, you can't just say it was a lock they were going to beat Phoenix. What was the mentality of the Phoenix area in that team? Did they think, you know what, that the Bulls may have won one title, it's our chance? Or did they look at the Bulls as being an insurmountable mountain that they couldn't get over?
To play well against the Bulls and win that series. They had the best record in the league that year. They had played well against New York, which was kind of the other team on the rise at that time in the East. They had played well against the Bulls. So, I think that they fully expected, and, they had Charles, the MVP of the league. So they had home court. And the other thing that was, you may recall that first round escape they made against the Lakers. Mm-hmm. Went to 5 games, and they were down 0-2 at home. And so that's when they kind of had that, we're a team of destiny. That was kind of Charles, his mantra, that we're destined to win this. And so, that comeback against the Lakers really kind of ignited the whole town, and I think gave that team and the city the belief that it was actually going to happen. As it turned out, Michael Jordan had something to say about that.
D and Davis Show, Demond Spiro, Kenneth Davis. Joining us right now, Bob Young of The Athletic AZ. Follow Bob on Twitter at Bob Young THI. Bob, one thing that's really jumping out at me is Charles Barkley's made his rounds around TV shows and sports shows. And one thing he's saying that That's I would definitely say good on his part is that he's taking full responsibility of the Suns not winning that first game, that game one against the Bulls. But can it give us an inside look at his leadership on that team and also the leadership during the finals?
Well, there was never any doubt from the day he arrived that he was the leader of the team, even though it was a really good team before that with all-stars like Kevin Johnson and Dan Marley and Tom Chambers. It was a really solid team. But, one of the first things he did at training camp, the very first night at training camp that season, he took out Cedric Ceballos in a scrimmage. I mean, he buried him and really kind of pissed off all of his teammates, new teammates. And he essentially wanted to deliver a message to them that, we're going to be a tougher team, and we're going to, and I want to see who's with me and who's willing to fight me, who's willing to fight with me. So that was kind of his message that, we're going to change things here, because they had a reputation of being a soft team, pretty team, pretty basketball, but not tough enough. And so that was his, and he and Cedric became really close friends. They were, I was one of his favorite teammates. But that first night, man, he hammered him and took him out and really kind of tested him. So yeah, he set the tone for that team from the very first day of training camp, and certainly in the finals. But I think he's taken that heat. But I think if you look back at that series, the guy that really played poorly in the first two games was Kevin Johnson. Mm-hmm. And I think Kevin would probably tell you that. And there was a feeling that there was a certain amount of maybe stage fright. They didn't have that finals pedigree like the Bulls. The Bulls had, coming off of 2 championships looking for a third. And the Suns, were not really ready for those first couple of games at home. And then, of course, they kind of turned the series around in Game 3, and Kevin Johnson was the guy that guarded Jordan in that game to some effect. I think he had 44 or something like that. But, but that kind of got him engaged in the series, and it was much better after that.
Dear Davis, right now we have Bob Young, contributing writer for the Athletic Arizona, joining us. He's been covering sports in Arizona for a very long time, so we needed him to join us to talk about the Phoenix Suns side of the 92-93 finals. Listen, it's funny because one of the questions I actually felt like watching our final back as a youngster that Kevin Johnson actually D'd up Mike fairly well. Like, because again, being like you said, it was a pretty team, and in a certain way, yeah, Dan Marley, that falls upon, and Tom Chambers, but KJ was the star of that team. So a lot of that kind of, I would say, sticks to him. But I remember when he switched off on Mike thinking like, Lil KJ is really getting down. And it leads to my question, Bob, how was the relationship between KG and Charles Barkley, being that it was KJ's team, and Barkley came in to be the alpha, and it didn't seem like that there was going to be any negotiation over that fact. And I always think about a player, a Phoenix Sun that I loved that didn't like prosper when he left the team. What Charles Barkley said about Elliot Perry running the point guard, as far as like, and he said it jokingly, quote unquote, but the team ran better when Elliot Perry was a point guard, a kind of a jab at KJ when KJ was hurt. How was the relationship, and how did Charles Barkley succeed the power from KJ, and how did KJ react to losing the power as being the alpha on that team?
I think that people that were around at that time will tell you that nobody sacrificed more with that team than Kevin. The only other one might have been Tom Chambers, since he was kind of a star and went to the bench and went to a 6-man role on that team. But Kevin Johnson accepted the fact that, the team was going to be Charles Barkley's team, and he wanted to win a championship, and he thought that, he realized that he was going to have to sacrifice some of his game to do that. Charles will tell you that there was never any problem there, and I don't think that there was, but they weren't like guys that they weren't buddies, on the road or anything like that. Charles had his guys on the team but one of his favorite teammates again was Mark West, and the guy that was closer to Kevin Johnson than anybody on that team was Mark West. Mm-hmm. So there was, and Cedric was another guy that was close to KJ. So there was a bridge there, if you will. And so, they made it work. Their personalities were so different, and their value system kind of was different, and Kevin was one of those guys that very thoughtful about everything he says, kind of picks and chooses his words very carefully. Charles, as you know, just lets it hang out. Whatever's on his mind, you're going to get it, and it may be completely different tomorrow, but that's okay. That was Charles. So yeah, but they made it work. And I think Kevin really sacrificed and recognized that he had to. And that's the way it was going to be with Charles. I think everybody knew that.
What's the relationship? I didn't think about this prior to this, but what's the relationship between the Phoenix community and Kevin Johnson with some of the things that have come out over the last decade about him? As far as, just some disturbing things that do they believe is factual? How's the relationship with KJ being that he was such a prominent star in that region?
Yeah, that stuff surfaced while Kevin was still in Phoenix, when he was still playing with the Suns. I mean, that stuff was known. It was reported. It was not pursued by the police or authorities and that sort of thing. I think he's still held in very high regard here, at least by basketball fans. I'm sure that people that are outside of, that kind of bubble of sports that we live in, they might have different opinions of him. But, he was a guy that was very active in the community and tried to help a lot of people. And at the time acknowledged that his judgment was bad in that situation. So yeah, he apologized for it and all that at the time. Like I said, he was not charged with anything, or, no charges were filed or pursued, but it was definitely bad judgment on his part, and he acknowledged that. And
look, one thing, so a guy that I used to love, I loved him as a son, I loved him as a Laker before Shaq and Kobe got there. If Cedric Ceballos was healthy in the 93 finals, do you think the Phoenix would have won, since he went down with the injury against the Supersonics in the Western Conference Finals?
Questions, we'll never know the answer. Richard Dumas was really good in those finals. He played extremely well. He had a couple of games. I had one game where I think it was might have been game 5, when he was like 12 of 14 from the floor or something like that. But Cedric definitely would have contributed and would have been another guy. He would have been the starter, and Dumas would have been coming off the bench. And Cedric was just one of those guys that manufactured points, and he was great. He was a great rebounder. So we'll never know, but he definitely would have had something to say about it. And he was definitely one of their top 5-6 players.
D and Davis Show, Bob Young joins us of the Athletic AZ. Bob, one thing that also was very apparent in this last couple of episodes was the fact that Michael Jordan seemed to be kind of like mentally burning out at that particular time. Now, he was covering the team, obviously, during the finals. But as far as the reporters, did you all get a sense of him burning out, or it was also I believe it's time around where he wasn't talking to the media for a little bit, but did you all get like kind of a sense like, man, saying this is not the Michael Jordan that we probably covered years ago, early in the 90s, or a kind of burning out sensation?
Yeah, I think there was a feeling throughout that season that there was a lot of drama there, and that there was a lot of distraction with the Bulls, and they weren't quite as overwhelming as they had been the previous season. And meanwhile with the Suns, they had the best record in the league, and, they were kind of on a mission, and Charles the MVP and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's why a lot of people thought that was definitely a series the Suns had a chance to win, because you could tell that there was a little bit of drama going on with the Bulls at that time. And as far as him being burned out, I never sensed that. He sure didn't play like he was burned out in the finals, but the guy did expend a lot of energy, to carry that team that season. So I can understand why he would be.
Yeah. Is there any angle that you would like to have been kind of like pushed a little more or portrayed more in these past couple of episodes with the finals between the Suns and the Bulls?
Yeah, I was trying to. I'd have to think about that. Like I said, there were a few things there that I wasn't, that I had not heard. One of them being the fact that Jordan was supposedly burned out. I don't recall, at least, hearing that aspect of it. No, I thought the Suns were a part of the, when you're looking at the whole the Last Dance, where the 6 championships and the final ride and all that stuff, they were a smaller piece of that bigger picture. And I thought it was fairly well covered. I will say this, and they spent a lot of time on that last shot of Paxson's and that play. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought, as much as I love Charles, he screwed up on that play. Ainge has always gotten the blame for leaving Paxson, and he did. And as a matter of fact, the last thing that they did when they broke the huddle, Ainge yelled at everybody, "No threes." And Ainge was the one that left Paxson for the 3. But if you look at that play, it breaks down at the very start because Charles jumped a pass from Jordan to Pippen trying to make the steal up above the top of the key. And that left him free, gave him room to break down the defense. And Ainge left Paxson to foul Horace Grant. And I don't think he ever thought in a million years that Horace Grant, right under the basket, was going to throw the ball back out to Paxson, although they did that in the series. It wasn't like the first time it had happened in the series where, they broke the defense down and then kicked it out. But you can see that he actually does grab him or push him right as Horace is passing the ball back out. He never should have left him regardless, but that all broke down when Charles tried to make that steal, and he gambled and lost that time.
Bob, real quick.
Gambles and loses a lot, by the way.
One thing that I do remember about that finals, and in particular that play, because Charles Barkley, I saw him recently talk about how he felt the first 3-peat team was better than the second, which he's probably right, especially when it comes to pressing defense. And he said that Horace was a better all-around player than Dennis, but he wasn't a greater player because Charles Barkley took Horace Grant's shake in that finals. As a kid, part of the reason that I always felt Horace threw that ball out, he didn't want to shoot anything. He didn't want to go Charles Barkley. He did everything. So Horace Grant had a terrible final. I think he had made 1 field goal in that game. Yeah. Possibly. It was when I saw it, it was no, not Horace. And when Horace got out, I was like, you knew you shouldn't have taken that shot. So even with that, I always think about that final when it comes to Horace. But look, you mentioned a player, and I definitely knew when we was going to have you on that I wanted to ask you about, because it's a forgotten player. He may not have been a great player in the long run, but he would have had a really decent career, if not a good career, and that was Richard Dumas. For people that never saw Richard Dumas play, tell them about Richard Dumas, and also how early on, of course the next season he was suspended because of his drug problem, but how early on did it start to seem like he had issues that were going to possibly take him off the court?
Well, when they drafted him, they knew that he had issues. He had issues prior to that. And it was one of those deals where, they decided that he was talented enough to take a chance and give him an opportunity and hope that he made the best of it. And, there were people in that organization at the time, Paul Westphal being one of them. There was an assistant coach named Scotty Robertson, who was another that they thought that other than maybe 2 or 3 players in the league, he had the potential to be better than anybody else in the league, other than the Jordans, of the world and the Barkleys. He was a fabulously talented player, and he was a rookie in the finals in that stage. So I still remember the next year when he was out and suspended. Out of the blue, I got a little tip that he might be coming back, because he was suspended indefinitely and in treatment and all that stuff. And so I asked Paul Westphal about it, and it was just me and Paul in his office, and I said, you guys planning to add anybody to the roster anytime soon? And he had this little look on his face, and he said, what if I told you that we were going to have the best player that's not playing basketball right now? And then he looked at me and said, and I don't mean Michael Jordan, because that was when Jordan was playing baseball, of course, the next year. And I said, I heard Richard might come back. And he said, yeah, he'll be here tomorrow. So it was one of those oh, well, that's a good story for me. Thank you. But anyway, so Richard was, man, it's just he's one of those guys that you wished he'd have been able to.
Roy Tarpley's.
Yeah, he just was so talented and a nice guy. I mean, just dealing with him and stuff. He had his demons. But he wasn't an unpleasant dude by any means. He just had a hard time with it. I remember that. I think it was that summer. Oliver Miller and Richard Dumas were roommates on a cruise. They had like a Suns cruise, where the players go on a cruise with some fans or sponsors or whatever. And Oliver said that, Richard would wake up in the morning and pour a shot and light a cigarette. That's how he got out. That's how he got out of bed in the morning. Like, okay. Whereas that was, this was a different era, but yeah. So, even Oliver, was like, wow.
And that's Oliver Miller.
Yeah. Right.
Who necessarily wasn't one to take care of himself, everybody. He was a large male for undersized center for people that don't know Oliver Miller. Talented, though. Dan Davis here with Bob Young of the Athletic Arizona. Follow him at Bob Young, THI Bob. Let me ask you about the end. So after the finals, did it seem like that was the best chance, or did there seem like there was still a run? Was it after John Stockton hit that shot in the playoffs to knock Phoenix out? Like, how was Barkley's exit? Were the fans ready to move on, or did they think they should just let this peter out and enjoy what they had right there?
Well, by the time that it was actually over, I think everybody knew that. I mean, Charles was basically forcing his way out at that point. But they had two golden opportunities. They were really good, and Jordan was no longer there, and they ran into the Rockets in, 2 years in a row and had them down 3-1 2 years in a row and couldn't close the deal. And, that was their really, the 90, everybody looks at that 93 finals as their big opportunity, but they were really, in position. In fact, I'm trying to remember which season. Well, I guess it was the second year after that finals when Danny Manning came, and they had far and away the best record in the league, or at least in the West. They had the best record in the league, but far and away in the West. And then Manning blew out his knee, you may remember. I think they were 36-10 or something like that at the time. They were really good. And they still, were probably, a good enough team to win a championship that year, even after that injury. So they had a 3-year run there where they definitely should have won a championship, and they just didn't get it done.
All right, Bob. Last one for me.
Sure.
The current state of the Suns. Right now, they're trying. Yeah, they're trying to rebuild. They're trying to get back up to that once good promise.
Some talent.
Yeah, it's some young talent on there. So, what do you think about the current state of the Suns and potentially how they're going to? Or hey, maybe you could drop a scoop for us right now. How do you envision, or have you heard anything about how the NBA might possibly open back up?
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do or what their plan is in that regard. I haven't heard anything more than you guys probably have. But that I think that two things have happened in the last couple of years that I think have really helped. And one is the biggest one is that they hired Monty Williams, and I think he wasn't coming without some security. So he got a 5-year deal, which they have not given a coach in a long time. So he got a 5-year contract. He's got a hammer, and they needed somebody to be in that position. And I think James Jones is going to prove to be a pretty good GM over time. He's kind of learning on the job a little bit, but hiring Monty was a pretty good hire, And they do have a good core of young players. They have some weaknesses, and the biggest issue with this team over the last 10 years has been, quite honestly, keeping the owner out of the way. When I don't know if he thinks he knows more basketball than he knows, or maybe he knows basketball and but he has made it difficult for the people that work for him over the last 10 years, and they just had so much change and so much upheaval that it's difficult to ever, break through. And I think the fact that they finally have some stability in the front office and that Robert Sarver has kind of moved aside and let them do their thing, at least to this point, I think that's a very good sign for the franchise.
Bob, my last one. One of the characters from that team that kind of has disappeared, and at that time, if you told me they were going to disappear, I wouldn't have believed it, was the head coach. I know Paul Westphal had stops with the Supersonics and the Kings, but he was like a TV coach. I would think that he would be on television, but at least have been coaching for at least 15 more years because he was just charismatic, and you thought he was going to be one of those breakthrough coaches that stayed around in the NBA for so long. What happened to Paul Westphal? Why didn't his coaching career, definitely a decent player, but why didn't his coaching career find more success after leaving the Phoenix Suns?
That's a good question, and I guess I don't know. I mean, he just never had another opportunity with a team that good. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. He coached briefly in college. He was at Pepperdine for a while, and he had his opportunities. That's for sure. But he never had another team like he had there. I thought, one of the things I loved about Westphal is, he wasn't a big ego guy. Those guys, they all have a certain amount of ego or they wouldn't be where they are. But he was a pretty, grounded guy. And one of the things that most impressed me after all those, all of his attempts and his opportunities as a head coach, Lionel Hollins, who had been, Lionel asked him to be an assistant for him. And, here's a guy that, Lionel used to work for him, and he was able to go work for the guy that he gave, that had worked for him. You know what I mean? He was able to put his ego aside and say, absolutely, I'll do everything I can to help you, like you did everything you could to help me. I have a lot of admiration for him, and he was I was glad to see him get into the Hall of Fame in this last class because he was a fabulous player. I'm old enough to have seen him play, and he was really good. He was the most creative scorer I've ever seen. For a guy, he had athleticism, don't get me wrong, but he was just so creative about how he could, manufacture openings and shots. And you have these little pirouette moves and stuff that were just, YouTube him. He's got some great highlights. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know. He was a smart guy. You may remember in the 76 finals, he was the one that suggested calling a timeout they didn't have and taking a technical so they could move the ball up to half court to inbound. In that triple overtime game, he was involved as a coach and a player in the only two NBA triple overtime games. And it was him that told the head coach, John McLeod at the time, let's use our timeout. They'll call a technical, but they'll only get 1 point, and we get the ball at half court. We'll be able to get a shot. And then Gar Hurd hit the shot heard round the world, as they call it, and sent it to another overtime. They ended up losing the game, but it was, that was the kind of chops he had. I'll give you another one. If you go back and while you're on YouTube, go back and look at the last regular season game of that 93 team where they won in Portland, and they ran a play that he drew up. They had like half a second on the clock, and they're inbounding from half court. So it's one of those, you got to catch it, shoot it, or, immediate, right? So he draws up a play with Oliver Miller, the center, who is a great passer. He tells Oliver, throw it at the rim. And so it looks like we want to set it up like we're doing an alley-oop for Cedric. But I want you to throw it high off the board. And Charles, you come in behind and catch it, and you got to shoot it instantly. And they ran that play, and Charles made that shot, and they won that game. And it was unbelievable that he would come up with that, this like schoolyard play. It was unbelievable. It's like the kind of thing you draw up when you're playing backyard football or something. Yeah, I mean, you run over there, you trail here, you roll the basket like we're going to alley-oop it, but bounce it up higher so that it goes to Charles. And they did that. And Oliver hit, he made that pass. It was unbelievable. the downside was in the celebration, Kevin Johnson hyperflexed his knee and ended up, maybe remember, he missed part of that Lakers series in the first round because of that. Yeah. So anyway,
Bob,
Paul was creative. That's for damn sure.
Bob, we definitely appreciate it. Everybody follow Bob at Bob Young THI. It's definitely been a lesson, and we look forward to talking to you down the line. You stay safe during this shelter in place, you and your family, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
I will do that. Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.